40 years ago, a 19-year-old girl named Della Mae Odom was found on the shoulder of Route 19 outside Calhoun, Georgia, on a Sunday morning in June. Her car, a green 1974 Dodge Dart with a broken taillight she had been meaning to fix, still running 50 yards up the road, the driver's door standing open. The Gordon County Sheriff's Office closed her case in 11 days. Their official conclusion: accidental death. A fall. They said she had pulled over, stepped out of the car in the dark, lost her footing on the embankment, and struck her head on the culvert drain below. They said there was nothing to investigate. They said these things happen on country roads at night. And they filed the paperwork. And they moved on. Della Mae's mother, a woman named Ruthie, believed from the first moment and never once stopped believing that her daughter had been put on that road by someone who expected to never hear her name again. She was right. It would take 40 years, a retired school teacher with a library card and too much time on her hands, a crime reporter who almost didn't take the call, and a single page of a coroner's report that had been misfiled in 1983 and should have changed everything to finally expose what the Gordon County Sheriff's Office had buried on a Sunday morning in June. But before we get to any of that, we have to go back to Calhoun, Georgia, in the summer of 1983. Because to understand what was hidden, you first have to understand who they thought they could hide it about. Calhoun, Georgia, in 1983 was a carpet mill town. The mills had been running since the 1940s, and they employed most of the county in some capacity. Men on the floor, women in the offices and sewing rooms, whole families whose weekday rhythms were set by the shift whistle. The town sat in a valley between two ridges of the Appalachian foothills, and on summer mornings the mist stayed low in the hollows until nearly 10 o'clock, burning off slowly as the day got serious. It was the kind of place where the same families had sat in the same church pews for 3 generations, and the obituaries in the Gordon County News were written by people who had known the deceased since childhood. It was also the kind of place, in 1983, where certain things were understood without being said, about who mattered and who didn't, about whose phone calls got returned and whose got lost, about what the word official actually meant when someone in a uniform said it. Della Mae Odom had grown up in Calhoun. She was 19 years old in the summer of 1983, the third of 4 children raised by Ruthie Odom, who had worked the second shift at the Dixie Belle carpet plant for 11 years, and who walked to work every morning in the same pair of low-heeled shoes, because she had never learned to drive. Della Mae's father had left when the youngest was still in diapers. Ruthie had not spent a great deal of time being angry about this. She had spent the time raising 4 children. Della Mae was the one who cooked when Ruthie was on shift. She was the one who walked her youngest brother to the school bus stop and stood at the corner until the bus actually appeared, not just until she could no longer see him. She had graduated from Calhoun High School the previous spring and had been working full-time at the Piggly Wiggly on Wall Street since July, saving money for nursing school. She had a folder on the kitchen table with brochures from 2 different programs. She liked gospel music. She had her mother's same directness about her, the kind where people sometimes bristled at first and then, 2 minutes later, understood that she had just told them something true that they needed to hear. She kept a small notebook in her purse for things she wanted to remember. Her supervisor at the Piggly Wiggly told investigators 3 days after she died that Della Mae Odom was the only cashier he had ever had who could make a customer feel genuinely welcomed in a grocery store checkout line. On the evening of Saturday, June 11, 1983, Della Mae finished her shift at 9:00 p.m. and walked to her car. Nobody from the grocery store ever saw her again. At 6:22 a.m. On Sunday, June 12th, a farm supply truck driver named Earl Spence was southbound on Route 19 when his headlights caught the green Dodge Dart sitting on the shoulder, driver's door open, engine running. He slowed. He pulled over. He walked to the car and looked inside. Keys in the ignition. Purse on the passenger seat. A brown paper bag from the Piggly Wiggly, lunch she had packed for work that morning, unopened on the floorboard. No driver. He walked the shoulder. The embankment on the east side of the road dropped 8 feet to a culvert drainage ditch, overgrown with kudzu and summer grass. He shone his work flashlight down. Della Mae Odom was at the bottom. Spence ran back to his truck and drove to the nearest house, a farmhouse a quarter-mile south, and asked to use the phone. The Gordon County Sheriff's Office received his call at 6:41 a.m. Deputy Roy Hicks was first on scene at 7:05 a.m. He observed the car. He observed the embankment. He observed Della Mae Odom, deceased, at the base of the drainage culvert. He noted a laceration to the back of the skull consistent, in his assessment, with contact with the concrete culvert lip. He did not secure the scene as a crime scene. He did not call for the county's one forensic investigator. He called the coroner. The coroner, an elected official named Darrell Potts, who had served Gordon County in that role since 1971, and who had, by all accounts, never once performed a formal autopsy, arrived at 7:45 a.m. He examined the body. He spoke to Deputy Hicks for approximately 12 minutes. He noted the head injury. He noted the proximity of the car. He filed a preliminary determination of accidental death before noon. Della Mae Odom's body was released to the funeral home by Sunday afternoon. There was one thing Earl Spence had told Deputy Hicks when Hicks first arrived at the scene, a detail Spence had included in his verbal statement and that Hicks had written in his notes. Spence had said that when he first pulled his truck alongside the Dart, he had noticed something on the hood of the car. A partial handprint, palm facing down. On the passenger side, the kind you leave when you press down hard on something. That note appeared on page 3 of Deputy Hicks's incident report. It was never mentioned again in any official document. When Ruthie Odom arrived at the funeral home on Monday morning to make arrangements for her daughter, she asked the deputy who met her there what they had found. He told her it appeared her daughter had had an accident on the road. She looked at him for a long moment. Della Mae drove that road every night, she said. She knew every curve of it. The deputy wrote that down. Nobody acted on it. The Gordon County Sheriff at the time was a man named Howard Burkett, who had held the office since 1974 and who ran his department the way certain men run things in small southern counties, by managing what got attention and what didn't. He was not, by the accounts of people who knew him then, a cruel man. He was a practical one, and the practical conclusion, reached before the weekend was over, was that the death of a 19-year-old black girl on a country road in the middle of the night was an accident, and that making it anything more than that would cost more than it would gain. There was no named detective assigned to Della Mae's case. There was no investigation opened. The official finding was logged, the file was created, and the file was closed. Ruthie Odom went to the sheriff's office on Tuesday, June 14th, and asked to speak with someone about her daughter. She was seen by a clerk who took her name and told her she would receive a call. The call did not come. She returned on Thursday. She was told the case was closed. She asked why. She was told the coroner had determined the cause of death. She asked about the handprint on the hood of the car. The clerk did not know what she was referring to. Ruthie hired an attorney, a man named James Faulkner, who practiced out of a one-room office on King Street and who took civil rights cases on a sliding scale. Faulkner wrote 2 letters to the Gordon County Sheriff's Office in July of 1983, requesting access to the incident report and the coroner's file. He received one response, which confirmed the accidental death finding, and stated that the matter was not under active investigation. He filed a complaint with the state attorney's office in Atlanta. The complaint was assigned a case number. It was reviewed. It was declined for further action. By the fall of 1983, the official machinery had spoken. Della Mae Odom had died in an accident on Route 19. The case was closed. The file was filed. What was not known, what would not be known for nearly 4 decades, was that the county coroner, Darrell Potts, had in fact sent a tissue sample from Della Mae's examination to the state crime lab in Atlanta as a routine matter of procedure. The crime lab had processed it. They had returned a result. The result had been mailed to Potts's office in August of 1983. The envelope was opened. The single-page report inside was removed. It was misfiled. Not destroyed, misfiled, placed inside the folder for an unrelated 1981 agricultural accident case that had been closed and boxed and sent to the county records room, where it sat for 40 years. Ruthie Odom made her calls. She wrote her letters. She drove to the sheriff's office twice a year, every year, for the next decade. Each time she was told the same thing. Each time she went home and sat at the kitchen table where Della Mae's nursing school brochures had been and looked out the window for a while. She never threw the brochures away. By 1990, 7 years had passed. Ruthie's youngest son had finished school and moved to Atlanta. The Piggly Wiggly on Wall Street had closed and reopened under a different name. The carpet mills were beginning the long contraction that would hollow out the county over the next 2 decades. Ruthie kept working. She kept her same pair of low-heeled shoes for church and bought a second pair for work when the first wore through. She kept Della Mae's photograph on the mantel, the school photograph from 11th grade, the one where Della Mae had been told to smile, and it instead looked directly into the camera with an expression that suggested she had better things to do and was going to do them, regardless. By 1998, 15 years on, attorney James Faulkner had retired. The sheriff who had closed the case, Howard Burkett, had died in 1994. The coroner who had filed the accidental death finding, Darrell Potts, had retired in 1996 and moved to a fishing cabin outside Ellijay. The deputy who had not secured the scene, Roy Hicks, was working private security in Dalton. The handprint on the hood had never been photographed. The car had been released to the family within the week and was sold for parts by 1984. By 2005, 22 years after Della Mae's death, Ruthie was 67 years old and had survived a mild stroke. Her older son moved back from Atlanta to help with the house. He found, in a box in the spare room, 47 handwritten letters, copies of every letter his mother had ever sent to the sheriff's office, the state attorney, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. 47 letters over 22 years. Every one of them logged, dated, filed. He sat at the table and read them all. The house next door, where a neighbor woman named Clara had lived who used to make Della Mae sweet potato pie on her birthday, had been sold twice and stood empty now. The church where the Odoms had attended since before Ruthie was born had a new pastor who had never heard Della Mae's name. Time had the way it does. It buried things. Not cleanly and not forever, but deep enough that most people stopped digging. Every story on this channel is the result of someone who refused to stop digging. If that kind of commitment to the truth matters to you, please like this video and subscribe. Drop us a comment with where you're watching from. We read every single one. Now, let's get back to Calhoun. The case had been cold for 38 years when a retired school teacher named Vivian Cross walked into the Gordon County Records Room in March of 2021 on a Tuesday morning that started like any other Tuesday morning, looking for something that had nothing to do with Della Mae Odom. She found it anyway. Vivian Cross had taught 7th grade history at Calhoun Middle School for 31 years. She was 64 years old, 2 years retired, and had developed a habit that many retired teachers develop. She could not stop researching things. She was 3 months into a personal project, a history of Gordon County's public health infrastructure, which she intended to eventually turn into something, though she hadn't decided what. And she had been granted access to the county's archived administrative records going back to the 1950s. The records room was in the basement of the county annex building. It smelled of old paper and a very specific kind of institutional dust. The boxes were labeled by year, and department on hand applied adhesive tags, many of which had dried and curled at the corners. The filing system was, by Vivian's assessment, creative. She was looking for documents from the County Health Office, 1981. The box labeled County Health/Coroner/1981 was in the 3rd row of shelving. She opened it and began going through the folders. The folder she pulled expecting the 1981 Agricultural Accident Summary, a case involving a farm worker and a machinery incident near Fairmount, contained, behind the accident report and before the insurance correspondence, a single sheet of paper on Georgia Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab letterhead, dated August 9, 1983. It was addressed to Darrell Potts, Gordon County Coroner. It was a toxicology and tissue analysis result for a case identified as Odom, Della May, June 1983. Vivian Cross read it once. Then she read it again. Then she sat very still in the basement of the county annex building for approximately 4 minutes. The report found elevated levels of a sedative compound in Della May Odom's tissue samples, a finding consistent, the report stated, with incapacitation prior to death, and inconsistent with the circumstances of a simple roadside fall. The accidental death finding had been made before this report existed. The report had arrived after. It had been misfiled, placed in the wrong box, the wrong folder, the wrong decade, and it had never reached anyone who knew what to do with it. Vivian Cross took a photograph of the document with her phone. She went home. She spent 2 hours on the internet and found the name of a crime reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution named David Osai, who covered cold case investigations. She almost didn't call. She told him later she wasn't sure anyone would care after so long. Osei took the call on a Wednesday afternoon. He asked her to read him the document over the phone. She did. He was quiet for a moment. "Where's the family?" he said. Ruthie Odom was 83 years old. She was living with her older son in the same house on Odom Street, where she had raised her 4 children. She still had Della May's nursing school brochures on the kitchen table. David Osei knocked on her door on a Friday morning in April 2021. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation reopened the Della May Odom case in May 2021, following a formal request from the Gordon County District Attorney's Office, prompted by David Osei's reporting. It had been 38 years since the case was closed. Most of the original actors were dead or elderly. The physical evidence, the car, the scene, the body was long gone. What remained was the document, and what the document implied, that someone had sedated Della May Odom before she ended up at the base of that embankment. That someone had put her in that car and left the engine running. That what Ruthie had known from the first moment was true. Her daughter had not fallen. The Geeby investigation was led by Special Agent Cora Maddox, 41, who had worked cold cases for 11 years, and who would later describe the Odom file as one of the most methodically suppressed she had encountered, not through dramatic destruction of evidence, but through the quiet, ordinary machinery of people deciding not to look. Maddox focused on 2 questions. First, who had access to Della May Odom in the hours between her leaving the Piggly Wiggly at 9 p.m. and her car appearing on Route 19 before dawn? Second, who in 1983 had possessed both the means to obtain a sedative compound and the social standing to ensure that a misfiled lab report was never followed up on? The answer to both questions led to the same name. Raymond Alcott had been the assistant manager of the carpet distribution warehouse on Highway 41 in 1983. He was 67 years old in 2021 and lived in a retirement community outside Chattanooga, Tennessee. He had left Calhoun in 1988 and had not returned. He had, in 1983, been one of the most socially prominent men in the county. A deacon at First Baptist, a member of the Rotary Club, a man who golfed with Howard Burkett on Saturday mornings. He had also, records confirmed, been prescribed a benzodiazepine sedative in 1983 by a physician in Rome, Georgia, the same compound class identified in Della May's toxicology report. Witnesses located by the GBI, people who had been 19 and 20 years old in 1983 and who were now in their late 50s, placed Alcott at the parking lot behind the Piggly Wiggly on the evening of June 11th. Two of them had seen it and said nothing at the time. One said she had never forgotten it. She had never come forward because she had not believed. In 1983 in Gordon County, Georgia, that coming forward would change anything. She was probably right. Raymond Alcott was arrested at his home in the Chattanooga retirement community on a Tuesday morning in September 2022. His neighbors reported later that he had been, in the years he had lived there, a quiet man. Courteous, he served on the Hoe Landscaping Committee. He brought casseroles to bereaved neighbors. He was charged with murder in the first degree in the state of Georgia. He died in pretrial detention in March 2023 at 69 years old before the case reached a jury. He made no statement. He offered no confession. He took what he knew with him. But what he could not take was the document. The single page in the wrong folder, the one that Vivian Cross found on a Tuesday morning because she had been looking for something else entirely. There is a school photograph of Della Mae Odom from 1981 when she was 17 years old. She is looking directly into the camera, not quite smiling, with an expression that her family describes as quintessentially hers, patient with the situation, unimpressed by the performance of it, somewhere behind her eyes already thinking about what she was going to do next. She was 19 years old when she died. She had a folder on the kitchen table with nursing school brochures in it. She had a younger brother she walked to the bus stop every morning. She had a mother who walked to work in low-heeled shoes and who, when the system told her to stop, wrote 47 letters over 22 years instead. Ruthie Odom was 83 years old when David Osai sat across her kitchen table and told her about the document. Her son was in the room. She listened to everything Osai said. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I always knew there was a piece of paper somewhere." She did not live to see the arrest. Ruthie Odom died in January 2022, at 84, 8 months before Raymond Alcott was taken into custody. She died in the house where she had raised her children. Her son said she had been peaceful toward the end, that she had told him she felt, after the GBI reopened the case, that somebody was finally in the room with Della Mae. Raymond Alcott died before he could be held accountable in a courtroom. That is an outcome the framework of this story cannot make satisfying, because it isn't. Some truth arrives too late for justice in its formal sense. But here is what 40 years of concealment could not bury. The document existed. It was filed by a crime lab technician who did their job correctly in August 1983. It waited in a box in a basement for 38 years. It was found by a retired school teacher who was looking for something else. It was published by a reporter who almost didn't take the call. And it gave Ruthie Odom, not the verdict, not the sentence, but the one thing she had asked for since a Sunday morning in June. the confirmation that she had been right. They buried the truth. They put it in a basement, in the wrong folder, in a box from the wrong year, and they left it there. And it still came out. I want to leave you with 3 questions. Does Raymond Alcott dying before trial change what justice means in this case? Or does the exposure itself count? What does it say about 1983 that the witnesses who saw him in that parking lot believed correctly, that coming forward wouldn't change anything? And how many misfiled pages in how many county records rooms in this country are still waiting for someone like Vivian Cross to pull the wrong box? Justice found Della Mae Odom after 40 years. Her mother knew before the first Monday was over. The document confirmed what Love already understood. If you believe that truth is worth finding no matter how long it takes or how deep it's buried, subscribe, because there are more stories like this one waiting. The links are in the description. Thank you for being here.